Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we've got a horror double feature. A little later in the show, we'll be talking about the film Talk to Me. But first, we're going to review a slightly more recent release, and this is Cobweb from Lionsgate Pictures. Young Peter is plagued by a mysterious constant noise from inside his bedroom wall, a tapping that his parents insist is in his imagination. As his fears intensify, he starts to believe that his parents are hiding a terrible and dangerous secret. This film debuted at the box office, I think it was a week ago from when I'm recording this, and Lionsgate drug their heels in releasing the box office returns. It turns out $2.3 million opening weekend for a budget that I believe was higher than that. Also produced by Evan Goldberg and Seth Rogen, but they produce a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's because Lionsgate was so weird about releasing the budget. That's what got me intrigued in it. And what is this movie? What's going on? It also had a trailer that you didn't immediately know what the horror was. It was just like creepy things. So without revealing, but you already know, my point of view on this, Ariana, what did you think of Cobweb?
I feel like this is the worst adaptation of Matilda that we could ever get. And I say Matilda because it's just like there's this vibe that the teacher is way more invested and is gonna end up like sticking to this kid at the end. It's just I wanted it to be something that it wasn't. So the delivery just was a thud.
The way I thought about it was saying it's not a predictable movie.
No.
But it's not a surprising movie.
No, and like there's nothing really interesting at the end of the day. The parts that are interesting is more like the visual aspect because we don't really get a sense of what time we're in.
They're kind of mixing around a lot of elements.
Yeah, because when you're in the house, it feels as if it could be like the 1970s, 1980s. And then when you're in the classroom, you think it's a little bit more modern because, we finally have a biracial or Black person in the mix. And she looks a little bit more modern amongst a lot of white kids.
Yeah, there's a very profound disconnect between home life and that tone and then school and that tone, which are the only two places we go in this movie. Yeah. It's very like at home it feels like they're trying to push almost like a fable-ish kind of tone where it's this is like a scary fairy tale you might have heard or something.
Yeah.
But that's so at odds with everything that's happening with the teacher. And so it just ends up being just a mess of things that never come together and really make sense in any way. And like I said, I like horror movies that don't reveal to you every aspect of what's going on with them. And we'll talk about that more with Talk to Me, which is a movie that its big horror conceit remains a mystery at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
But here they reveal some things to you, but those revelations don't make any logical sense based on every other piece of information in the movie.
No.
So then you're left wondering, what hold up, are we ever going to get like even just an inkling of backstory to understand how this all makes sense? I also say this has one of the worst horror movie endings I've ever seen in my life. It felt like they didn't know what to do with the movie. They didn't know how to end the movie. So they just kind of edit together a montage of things that might be happening or Peter, the little boy, might be imagining with voiceover.
Yeah.
And it was a thud of an ending. One of the worst endings.
Yeah, you really get a sense that like the house feels obviously like a stage setup, right? So the walls feel paper thin.
Definitely on a sound stage.
It's on a sound stage, and I think it's supposed to make you feel as almost like you're in a doll's house. Like none of this is real.
We're kind of pushing that. I think Greta Gerwig, when she talked about Barbie, the authentic artificiality, where we're not trying to pretend that this is real.
And there doesn't feel as if like this child, Peter, has any love towards the house. Like a lot of like when we see him playing, he's playing with a ball, like hitting it against the wall. We don't see him like play with any other toys. We don't really see him painting. There's like nothing really about Peter that's interesting except he's a shy, quiet little boy.
And I also didn't understand, like, continuity wise, they hadn't just moved to this town.
No.
And he's lived with these parents his whole life.
Yeah.
But it's like suddenly now things get weird. And there's never a catalyst that started it. It's just like, oh, he lives in his house and then his parents just get weird suddenly. And it felt like, well, had he never noticed anything weird? There's a scene where he's punished by being taken down into the basement.
Yeah.
And we see there's some sort of like pit that's been made with a locked grating over the surface of it.
Yeah. And
he doesn't react to that really.
No.
And the implication is he knows it's there, but then you're like, oh, what? I don't understand why nobody's talking about this, or yeah.
Like what it is that like the parents do. So the mom is a stay-at-home mom who used to be a teacher.
The dad wears a lot of plaid shirts.
Yeah, the dad is
a lumberjack. I don't know.
Working on the house all the time, but we don't see that. Like when we see the exterior of the house, it just looks deteriorated and awful.
So I think like the implication is he's spending all his time trying to construct ways to contain this thing.
Yeah.
But the movie does not communicate that even in a way that you could infer that. You just kind of have to like sit and go, well, that's the only thing I could imagine he was doing with all his time.
Because like the house is kind of terrible, and so there's just also like this weird thing, like we don't really get to know the parents besides the fact that like Lizzie Kaplan's character Carol is the nicer parent compared to Anthony Starr's Mark, who's like the more like.
But they both have like wild mood swings that aren't explained, and I would think it would make sense if the sort of entity was making Peter see them that way, but they weren't really that way. But they really are that way.
Yeah, and it's also like this weird thing, like I wish, like, because then you have the whole teacher wanting to investigate his like home life, which is like kind of bizarre.
Well, she's also, we forgot this, she's a substitute teacher.
She's a substitute teacher who's getting like too involved. And here's the thing, like there is never like any notes of when she tries, like if she were to say, oh, talk to another kid or talk to another teacher who had Peter.
Or report like, to, the Department of Children's Services or something.
Like, yeah, Peter's parents never come to parent-teacher night. They're just very conservative. They keep to themselves kind of thing.
Because for the longest time, I thought it was going to be revealed that his parents weren't real, that it was some like hallucination or ghosts or something. And no, they're real. So yeah, like you're saying, it doesn't make any sense in the context of the town that they live in.
Yeah.
How are they seen by the people who live here?
Like nobody really talks about them. They have a bunch of pumpkins in their backyard.
Well, they live in the middle of a neighborhood in a city. If they were out in a rural area, it would make more sense that, we don't see them very often. They're kind of out on their own. But it's a seemingly populated area, though we never see anyone walking around their neighborhood.
It could have been like, hey, they kind of, they're the last neighbors on this block. They've been holding out for whatever fucking reason.
Because people have been comparing this somewhat to Barbarian. But I would say massive giant asterisk there. Barbarian is a very well-made, thoughtful horror movie that knows how to deliver both the horrors and the themes and the character of that film. This movie has none of that.
Yeah, and it has a bad theme of it being like, so Peter's supposed to be like afraid of being in the dark, that he has nightmares, and we're supposed to get the vibe that the parents are kind of like, oh, this kid is afraid of everything kind of thing. And like they don't really punish him until like towards the end.
Because the teacher gets involved.
Yeah. And then like it's supposed to be like this whole thing like Peter is quiet, is being bullied by a kid who's obviously a bully. But there's like this weird thing that we don't see, for example, as most movies would do, is him having a friend who maybe is also bullied kind of thing. That is
he has no one to bounce off of.
No one to bounce off of except this teacher. This substitute teacher who like does get chastised later on of being like, hey, did you go to their parents' house? Like you shouldn't have done that. Like you should have done that, and they're like, it was probably one of the best written parts where they're being very realistic, but it was also just delivered so flat that you're like, great.
That's another thing is all of the actors in this movie I've seen in other things and have done good jobs. Here they are awful.
Yeah.
And I have to attribute it to it's the feature debut of director Samuel Bowden, who, from what I could tell, I think maybe has done short films, YouTube video type things. He did like a Batman fan film that got a lot of acclaim, apparently. And I can kind of see that in this movie. It feels very amateurish.
Yeah, because it's hard due to the fact that like Lizzie Kaplan has a moment where she's with Miss Divine, played by Cleopatra Coleman. And it is it's like watching two worlds collide that should not fit in. Like they're in two different realities.
They're both trying to figure out how to play the roles they're in, and they're each going in different directions from each other. So the scene just has like a chaotic tone of where you're just like, I don't understand what anyone is trying to communicate in this scene.
Like it would have been more interesting if there was like a difference between how like Carol, the mom, talks to Miss Divine versus how she talks to her son, except it's the same tone as if like she's been lifted off of like a children's book.
She baby talks to every character.
Yes, and she's just like, oh, that picture that my son drew that said, help me. Oh, he has an overactive imagination.
We like things like that where it's every reason that's given to explain why he would draw horrific things is like the most cliche reason you would ever find in any horror movie.
Yeah, instead of it just being like, maybe her tone becoming a little bit more casual and realistic, and just being like, oh no, he has nightmares. He just probably like hasn't really told me about it. Like he has night terrors. I'm so embarrassed. We'll see what we can do about it. Instead of it's like, oh no, Peter, you were bad. Now some bad things in school is gonna happen, and you're gonna be homeschooled.
I don't just want to blame this on the director, I also want to blame this on the screenwriter, Chris Thomas Devlin, who he wrote an unsolicited screenplay for Cobweb.
Yeah.
So just sent it around. It got included on the 2018 blacklist, which is movies that people in the industry are aware of and really want someone to make, but it doesn't seem like anyone's going to make them, but they have like great premises. So he got notability where he was hired to write the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022 reboot for Netflix, I believe was on. And I remember we saw the trailer and it seemed like a lot of references to Zoomers and Zoomer slang, like obnoxiously so. Yeah, I think and then they also
the whole Halloween thing of it being like, here's a survivor.
But it wasn't even the actress who played Sally Hardesty from the first movie because I think she died. So they just recast some other old lady. So it's not even like David Gordon Green's Halloween, where it's like, well, it really is Jamie Lee Curtis, if nothing else. So the Texas Chainsaw Massacre got made first. And then I guess they decided to produce this next. And I would not be asking the screenwriter to write any more for me if I was a studio, because this is bad.
The thing is, like, it makes me kind of sad because watching Lizzie Kaplan, I was just like getting to that point. I'm like, oh yeah, I am officially like becoming old, because it's like she's around my age.
She's about 40, yeah.
And it's like now she's playing all these mom characters, which is fine that age comes. But it's also very disheartening because it's like we've seen her in roles where she's funny, she's quick, she's good at her job, but to do this, and I'm not saying it's like,
it was kind of embarrassing. Like,
yeah, because it's just,
does she really need the work this bad? I mean, I hope it was a good paycheck.
I mean, I hope she keeps her insurance.
The story, in terms of the horror and the thing that's eventually revealed, because while we were watching it, I remember we both were kind of making references to what it was referencing.
Yeah.
First of all, it feels like a Goosebumps book.
Yep.
But that level of maturity. But this is a R-rated horror film. And that was one thing I discovered. I never read Goosebumps growing up because it was, evil Christian parents who were crazy, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I missed out because I have read some Goosebumps books as a teacher, like around Halloween time, find one that's not too bad, read it. They are horribly written. They are redundant. The characterization is always paper thin, and you can go, oh well, they're books for kids. No, I want children to have good books. Children should have books that respect their intelligence, and I don't feel that Goosebumps does. Everything hinges on a premise and a cover.
Yeah.
And then when you really get down to it, it's just very formulaic and boring and really not that scary at the end of the day, because they hold back. They weren't willing to go as far as you're supposed to.
Yeah, and like a lot of times you just don't feel that Peter is at risk, or like, do you feel like there's like no tension built up as to what could occur to him?
Well, because I'm like, here's some things that I knew watching this movie. The parents will be dead by the end of this movie. I knew that, like, as soon as they were introduced and they started getting weird. Then in that, near the end of the second act, where the big horror is revealed, they're clearly not going to kill Miss Divine, and they're clearly not going to kill Peter, but somebody needs to die. So out of nowhere, after maybe 30 minutes of absence from the film, a van pulls up outside, and it's the school bully and his older brother and some of his older brother's friends, and they've decided to come on Halloween night to fuck around with Peter because Peter shoved the bully down the stairs.
Yeah.
And that is something that felt, as soon as that van showed up, I was like, I can feel the writer at work going, ooh, but we need like some really gruesome kills, and there was barely any characters in this movie. Let me just introduce like 3 characters out of nowhere and bring back the school bully, and we'll just let them all die.
Yep.
And that's what happens, and it's all of the cliche things you could think of and the ways that they die. I feel like there's a lot of digital blood splatters.
It's the part that it started to feel a little bit like Malignant. And
not as good though. I love Malignant. Malignant's insane.
Thinking for a second, oh my god, it's just gonna go off the rails,
and it doesn't. They're too scared.
It just like decides it doesn't want to do it.
But you are right in it. There is this sort of secrets about Peter's family that he doesn't know that inform what the horror is element of Malignant.
Yeah.
But Malignant at least had James Wan, who is a good filmmaker, whether his movies are bonkers or not. But like this movie,
like with all the loopholes, you're entertained.
Yeah, with Malignant, I was just so lost in how ludicrous, especially the jail police department sequence in that movie is amazing. And this movie never comes anywhere close. I didn't find any like joy in the irony of anything in this movie, because it takes itself so seriously.
Yeah, and I think it's just it's a waste of time at the end of the day. I didn't feel any tension. I didn't feel any concern for this kid, because it's just delivered like he's like, I'm just a little boy. I don't know what's going on. I'm so innocent. And then
he's like a 12-year-old kid. It's like, you have brains. You would be making assumptions about things. You'd be putting things together.
When he does a bad thing, you don't feel as if he understands how bad it was. Or you don't feel as if like he's afraid of the consequences.
And I think that's direction. They didn't know how to play their characters because their director wasn't giving them any information. I think what happened is this director is probably good at special effects, because I would say I didn't think the visuals of the movie were bad.
No.
The visuals were strong, but they were certainly not enough to carry how bad and wooden the acting was.
Yeah.
I was never scared. I never felt freaked out. I was never unnerved. I never felt any of the things that you're supposed to feel when you watch a horror movie. I just felt like, I'm so glad this movie is only an hour and 30 minutes long. Yeah. It was the perfect amount of time. It ended before I really got tired of it. But like, once again, it's one of those where you're like, oh, it's clear that they're sequel baiting, I guess. I don't know with that ending.
Definitely.
But like, none of the reveal made sense, because spoilers, if you give a shit about Cobweb, you shouldn't. The creature is revealed to literally be Peter's older sister that he never knew about. But there's no explanation as to why she can crawl on the walls and the ceiling and has like ludicrously long hair and like claws she slashes people with. There's no like, I never felt, and I don't know if you saw, was there any hint that like a demon had been summoned at any point, or like occult or arcane things around the house. It didn't feel like it.
No, and then there's also like this weird thing that they don't celebrate Halloween, and it's supposed to be like, oh no, it was like a girl, that house down the street, which we never see. The house that's boarded up on the street.
Yeah, I thought they were gonna do like a dramatized flashback or something.
And like I thought for a second when it was like being revealed that someone was in the walls, like it would have been like they captured that girl and put her in the walls for whatever reason. Like no,
but I'm like, was that their daughter who killed the little girl that went missing? Like, there's no, but the film doesn't even give you like a newspaper clipping or something for you to go.
Child, because like Kaplan was like 16.
Yeah, because like Lizzie Kaplan's 41. This creature sounds far older, and I know they're like doing a voice or whatever, but we don't get a sense of the age of the creature either, or like why was she born so deformed and fucked up and weird? Like
this weird thing that it's because Peter is hearing things in the walls. They're just kind of like, well, the house is very old and things could bump in the night. And like it would have been more interesting had you seen the parents have like almost like if their mood swings are going to occur, being like, no, they're worried now that it's sort of like they're doing even more repairs in the house and inconveniencing,
escalating or something.
Like maybe like they kick him out a few times, or just being like, you can't be in the house, dad has to fix this.
Yeah, their behavior doesn't align with the threat.
No, and it's sort of like, so if you have that thing downstairs in the basement where they had him, I think that they would probably be like, don't touch this, don't touch that. And there's like,
and I also understand, why was the creature in the space right next to their son's bedroom?
It was supposed to be like she crawled out of like the area that she was in.
Okay.
Because she was like, oh no, I crawled out, so I'm able to like get.
And they thought she was still locked up down there.
Yes.
But are they not checking?
Apparently not, because it's like the only way that she can get out was like through that through the wall behind the clock. And like again, visually it was interesting because when he goes to check on that door is like shorter than him, so he's kind of like, is he supposed to crouch? And then like it's also like there's so much that even though you're gonna leave it for your imagination kind of thing, it just, there wasn't enough creepiness amongst the parents to maybe like, hey, the mom is singing at the walls trying to calm the girl down, or like the dad like making a big issue about like he is never, like Peter is never allowed to go into their bedroom for whatever fucking reason, like kicking him out of the house sporadically because they need to fix something, and then like having them freak out of making sure that their secret is withheld while trying to keep this child innocent from their past sins.
Well, like, yeah, I never understood the parents' relationship to the daughter.
No, because
it's just they're imprisoning her, but how do they feel about her? Do they love her? Do they want to kill her? Like, what is going on?
Yeah, because it's like this weird thing is that towards the end, before like Carol, aka Lizzie Kaplan, is about to like, whatever. She's like telling her son, is like, whatever you did, it's your fault. And just acting, and like you'd probably be like, all right, then you're saying that your child like can kill. Can we please get something like explain why we need to be afraid?
Well, and what I would guess is that this is a film that was inspired from an image rather than an idea.
Yeah.
Because when you think about Barbarian and what was his name? Zach Kreger?
Yeah.
And he talks about having read The Gift of Fear, and then that inspiring him to write a dialogue scene between a man and a woman, and that building into the horror. He didn't start from a horror point of view per se. He started from, this is an idea and let's figure out an interesting way to look at this idea from some different angles. I don't get that sense from this movie. This movie was just, hey, did you like that scene in this movie? We should do something like that. Wouldn't it be really creepy if? And that's not a good foundation for a movie that's going to be memorable or a film that somebody's going to want to revisit. It just feels like cobbling together some greatest hits of horror movies.
That's how it felt.
And that are disconnected and don't really there's no membrane binding them to each other.
Well, especially when we already talk about the fact that this film had been, at least the script had been circling around since 2018. So it just means that like once it started in production, they started to see, all right, what are the new hits going on that aren't big budgets? And they started like tacking.
There's like some Hereditary in there,
Yeah.
Malignant,
but it's
all kinds of James Wan stuff,
but
Barbarian.
not considering the fact that when we see those characters in these strong, like those characters feel already established. They have a history. There's
like, an implication that their lives were going on before the movie started.
Yeah, there's like ticks, there are things, there are triggers, and we find out what those triggers are, and that really sets them off. And it's really hard to do that when we don't have an understanding of the parents, when we don't have an understanding of the kid, and
the threat
that's going on, of why it should be scary. And then you top it off of like putting on this teacher who's like the only person who you kind of understand, but even then,
well, she actually has a goal.
Like, yeah,
I want to rescue the kid. No one else has. What are they do? Like, what are Carol and Mark's goals as the parents? Contain the monster, but that's not really a goal. They're already doing that. They're already containing the monster.
It's like we don't see them struggling to contain it.
Yeah,
they just see. It seems like to us like, oh, it's supposed to be like they're overconfident about it until
because it's from the point of view of Peter. And what is Peter's goal? Find out why my parents are weird. Yeah, but why and that's so like roughly defined, and you don't really know. Well,
the thing is, like, because we don't have him bouncing off someone else, we don't see Peter go to someone else's house and being like, huh, that's what parents act like.
Yeah, like, I don't know what Peter thinks his life is supposed to be like, because all he does is go to school and come home.
Yeah.
And he's not weird like his parents. Like, that would be one thing, because I thought, oh, if it was kind of Addams Family-ish and, he was off and weird and kind of morbid.
No.
Not really.
He's just a kid that doesn't have any fucking friends.
They feel like they were dolls that just came to life the minute the cameras were turned on.
Yeah, and that's a problem because, at the least show us Peter watching television and being like, okay, and then maybe like hanging out at a friend's house and staying over the night after huge hesitation from his family and him realizing like, oh, that's the way that like AK normal parents act, kind of thing. Him realizing that there isn't bumps in the nights in the house of their house, or like if he was scared, it was out of something stupid.
There's not like weird rules about where you can and cannot go in the house.
But the thing is, like, there isn't even any rules of where he can and cannot go in the house. There's nothing established that there should have been established for him to be like having a comparison, and then for him to be like, all right, cool, I need to get some help. And like, or make him even more afraid to be in his own house, except when he's locked in the basement. That's the only freak out that he has, because he can't hear his sister.
Yeah, and I would say it's one of those movies that don't waste your time. No. That's what I would say. When a group of friends discovers how to conjure spirits by using an embalmed hand, they become hooked on the new thrill until one of them unleashes terrifying supernatural forces. We're talking about the latest A24 horror film, Talk to Me, which is the debut feature of Australian brothers Danny and Michael Philippou, who I also think maybe had done some YouTube things, but they'd also worked on The Babadook, I think, doing special effects. So, Ariana, what did you think of Talk to Me?
I didn't really like it that much.
Okay.
I'm not going into the idea of it being overhyped. I think it was a little bit too influenced by It Follows.
Yes.
While also kind of missing certain beats that it felt like it was trying to do, but didn't really go all the way with.
My thoughts on it were that it feels like it was holding back from being as disturbing as it really could have been.
Yeah.
There's these little flashes of disturbing things. And it also feels like there is some element, and I can't name what it is, but there's just something not there that's supposed to be there that would have brought everything together, would have made it a truly terrifying movie, but it just feels like there was an absence of something.
I felt as if the absence was there was a lack of tension and a lack of me getting involved with these characters.
Yeah.
There was a lot of it sprinkling at the beginning and then like a little bit towards the middle, but then it just lost me. It completely lost me. Like it's with It Follows, like, yeah, you have a friend group, you know the dynamics of the friend group. We don't get too involved in it, but you know what's going on.
Well, I think part of that is in It Follows, Micah Monroe's character is clearly the main character of the movie, and the movie never loses focus from her.
Yeah.
In Talk to Me, Mia is the main character, but there are parts of this movie where it shifts to Riley, her best friend's younger brother.
Yeah.
And he is important to the story. But that shift in focus, I think, kind of made me unsure of who the movie's supposed to be about.
Yeah.
And it eventually comes back to Mia, and it feels, very clearly Mia's movie after that point. But starting out, I was a little unsure of, is this going to be kind of an ensemble thing? And it wasn't. And so I think that's why it feels so off, is it didn't concretely say Mia is our main character and we're following her through, like she's in every scene of this movie, save for maybe some like creepy foreshadowing scenes.
Yeah.
And if you go back to It Follows, that character is in every single scene.
Yeah.
However, I do think the horror concept here is a lot better than Cobweb.
Yeah.
And it works. We were talking about tension. There are tense scenes. I think the opening of Talk to Me is a really great tense scene. So this man we don't know is wandering through a house party looking for his brother, and it becomes clear that his brother has been affected by the supernatural element at work here. And then later, it's the party where Riley has his does Talk to Me for the first time. That scene had the tension that I was waiting for.
Yeah. It was like gruesome to the point that I remember like I accidentally pulled my glasses down that it scratched the side of my nose because it was just like
that was where it went for it.
Yeah, it went for it. And I think it's just, and I'm not even asking for more of that. I'm asking for make it tense that I think that could happen again, or that I get so involved that I don't want that to happen again. Like, don't bring me back.
Yeah, because I felt I kept thinking like, okay, this is the moment the movie cracks open and it just gets fucked up. But then that moment, the tension builds, bursts, calms down. And then we never get back to that moment again. We get little flashes, like when she's has the boyfriend sleeping over and she sees the spirit appear that's all freaky and weird. And it doesn't really do anything that threatening. It's just weird.
Yeah.
And so for the rest of the movie, it's just kind of like, oh, isn't this weird? Isn't that creepy? But because you've shown me the potential of how vile and horrible this could be, everything else you're showing me just doesn't feel I don't feel as threatened by it because I know what this thing could do.
Yeah.
What did you think of the performances in the movie?
I thought they were okay. I thought that the friend group together, they had a chemistry about it when they were all together. When you kind of pull people apart, they're kind of dull.
Yeah, I felt like the main actor, Mia, played by Sophie Wilde, is good, but didn't compel me as much as other like leading actors in a horror movie have before.
Yeah, and like watching the film, I was telling you before that like Jade, who plays the best friend, she felt like the character that would have been the main character normally.
Yeah, and that Mia would have been the friend who there's something off with her.
Like Mia would be like that, the chaotic agent that's bringing in what's going on. Because I thought Mia would have been a little bit more interesting, because at first she hesitates to like pull the trigger on something, and then later on when she's having a conversation with Jade, she's like, let's go to this party, and Jade's like, I don't want to go, and she kind of like manipulates her to go, being like, well, it's the second year my mom passed away and I just don't want to be by myself.
Because I was trying to think of like Mia's character traits and how they play into the plot of the film. You talk about when she can't pull the trigger. That scene is clearly, that feels like the most scripty scene of the movie, where it's clearly like, oh, she is unable to deliver mercy when needed. That's gonna come back later.
Yeah.
And then but then there's also the manipulation.
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes it felt like she was manipulating people, but then other times it felt like that wasn't a relevant trait to the movie. And that was very inconsistent for me, because if we'd established, oh, Mia will lie to get her way, and then you follow that trait through in the context of this story, you could have had some really interesting scenes.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's this whole thing that, like, when Jade and Mia have an argument, because, like, Riley gets hurt, like, Jade is like, you're invading my family kind of thing. And there isn't, like, ever a conversation with an adult, with like someone going like, Mia, you really do spend too much time over at their house. Like, it's supposed to be she's irritated by her father, she doesn't want to be around him, she's mourning her mother, but there's also like there's little hints here and there, but we don't really truly see it out there, because like when the friend group happens, like Haley sees Mia and is like, ugh, Mia, why the fuck did you bring her? And they're at this party and Mia's not really like hanging out with anybody.
But then Mia seems like the one who's more eager to go to parties than Jade. So that doesn't track.
And so it becomes really weird, because like Jade is a little bit more popular and is kind of flirting with Haley. And then, but Jade also has a boyfriend, and people keep being like, no, Jade's boyfriend Daniel is obviously more into Mia, but we don't really see it.
It's all supposed to have happened years ago.
It's supposed to happen years ago, and it's just like they put these hints of the dynamics, but they don't follow through with them.
Because I think would have been more interesting, because like in the movie starts so focused on Mia and her family and the loss that she's going through, but then it suddenly shifts to like, oh, how embedded she is in Jade's family.
Yeah.
And that was jolting to me, because I thought, oh, we're going to get to know more about Mia's home life. And it was like, oh, we're not. We're just going to switch to this other family.
It's supposed to be like she hangs out over at their house more often.
And then we didn't really know the background between, like you're saying, these characters. And I kept thinking, oh, the twist is going to be that Mia is actually in love with her friend Jade, and that's why she's always wanting to be around when Jade's boyfriend is there, not that she's into the boyfriend. That would have been a far more interesting direction for the plot to go. And I think when you think about the horror that plays out, that would have added another bit of complexity to that dynamic that it doesn't when you just turn it into like a, oh, she wants to steal my boyfriend thing, which feels very cliche and old fashioned.
Cliche, and it feels very weird, because Haley and Jade have a lot of moments where they're obviously flirting with each other.
Yeah, and Haley is like a trans man or a gender fluid person.
And it's just sort of like, and I would have felt like I would have been more compelled had Jade and Haley actually hooked up, because there was obviously chemistry between them. There's obviously something going on, but it's supposed to be like Jade is so like loyal that she can't do anything, so she can't fuck up.
When she's also like this goody two shoes, they kind of frame
like,
it.
They don't really make anybody conflict with one another. Like people aren't really like, when they do have a confrontation, it's really quick to forgive, and it's kind of confusing, because me remembering being around that age, like when you got into fights, like you were getting into fights, like you were kind of like you would forgive each other, but it's just like it's almost like I wanted them to get nastier than they did.
Well, I also think the most interesting character in the movie is Riley, the little brother.
Yeah.
I think he's one of the better actors in the movie. And the arc he goes through, there's a certain point where, without going into spoilers, he doesn't really get much to do after a certain point.
Yeah.
But I found Mia and Riley's dynamic, that was the dynamic I wanted more of from this movie.
Yeah, when they get into that conflict between what happened with Riley, like you wanted more out of it, but it was
But like me, I wanted to know Mia and Riley. I wanted to
Yeah.
see those two in more scenes
yeah, because it's like
because it was like his biological big sister is lame because she's his big sister, but he has this kind of surrogate sister in Mia who you can tell he's supposed to have a little bit more of a
crush on,
yeah
like, kind
crush
of
on
thing.
her. He's more interested in talking to her and hearing what she has to say about things.
Yeah.
And so that was what made it more interesting. And yeah, Jade and Mia, the direction it goes, just they could have picked a better route, I think.
Yeah, and then there's like following the whole like it follows thing. They go and track the person who like was attacked in the first scene,
Yeah.
right? I don't feel like they got any fucking info. All they got was
It's bad.
hey, Haley and like Josh, you two are terrible people doing what you did. And that's it.
Yeah, it felt like that was meant to be kind of a lore scene. And
I got none.
yeah, and I'm fine that like by the end of this movie, I don't know where this hand came from. You have characters share different stories they've heard about where it came from. I love that. I love that there's things written all over the plaster on the hand that could play into things, and like because I know the brothers are talking about doing another movie using the same hand, the same horror conceit. I have no problem with that. But like your one scene that's supposed to kind of just feed us a seed of lore, yeah, like you said, it's just it happens, and we get the same vibe we had before that scene was yeah, the hand's bad. And you're sort of, yeah, I've watched horror movies before. I know it's going to turn bad, but it would have been nice if this guy had maybe alluded to weird things that occurred as a result of this object, just to kind of like hype up the horror.
Or also the confrontation of like Haley and Joss coming to him after what he went through. Like he is so calm at the beginning that like yeah, he rejects them and like they're like backing away, but it's like I wish that there would have been more of a confrontation to see how like Haley and Josh almost be like maybe we need to stop doing this. Like at some point they don't know where the hand is and they're not freaking out as badly as they should about it.
And I felt like those characters needed some kind of closure and they don't. That scene that kind of the whole film pivots on, after that they're just kind of like gone from the movie for the most part. I think they show up one more time.
Yeah, and it's almost like kind of crude the way that they're written, which kind of it can be a problem for me because it's like they're two characters of color and it's just sort of like them being like, well, we don't give a fuck.
Well, no, I mean, I don't know if I'd play that angle into it. I thought that they were more just teenagers who realized how much fucking trouble they would be in, so they're kind of like wanting to distance and disconnect.
They would have showed it more because
it just wasn't, like I said, they just kind of fall out of the movie.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, they don't fall out of a movie being like, hey, I don't want to get fucking arrested after everything that's happening. They just kind of like fade out and are kind of like, oh, well, we fucked up before. And it's never like.
It's just like the movie is going, well, they're not important anymore. Bye.
Then that's my problem with it at the end of the day, because it's just sort of like you have these characters who are giving this sort of vibe that they don't give a fuck, then are like, okay, no, we'll help you find answers. And then
well, like how were they affected by what they saw?
Yeah, like,
and we don't really know.
Or, you know, maybe like being worried that they're gonna get arrested because they're kind of like, we were handing like, yeah, the kid doesn't have any drugs in his system, but we were like, we're the constant thing around, so we're gonna get in trouble. So we need to like bounce back. We don't care what the fucking hand is, just don't bring it back to us, kind of thing.
Well, because I'm wondering if that's sequel bait where some detective will make a connection between what we saw in the opening of the movie and then the presence of Haley and Joss when Riley has his moment, and that, oh, they were at both places. I wonder what's going on. And I hope that's not what it is. What did you think of the way the movie portrayed the dead, the horrors in the movie? Because it's anytime somebody features ghosts, I'm always interested in, okay, what's their take on it going to be?
I don't know how to feel about it because Mia goes through this whole thing where she is trying to find someone in the other side, right? And there's like this whole thing of it being like they're being tricksters and they're just like fucking around. And I almost wish they would have emphasized on the fact that they are liars and make you see whatever it is that you want to see, versus what we end up being of her just like wandering. So I don't know how I feel about it. It's interesting, but it wasn't enough for me to be hooked.
I thought I needed just a tad more clarity on if they were actually talking to who they thought they were talking to, because then that kind of colors things in different ways. If they were talking to totally disconnected spirits, but spirits who could manifest themselves as people that the living desired to see, that's interesting, because that makes more sense as to why Mia goes down the path that she does.
Yeah.
But it would also be equally interesting if they really are communicating with those people, because then that would make the path that Mia goes down much bleaker and much darker, because it would imply things about the spirit that she's talking to post life that are horrifying.
Yeah.
That like people we know, when they die because of the nature of death, become monsters essentially. Like I like that. I say the one big thing that I liked from this movie is the bleak hopelessness of it. It is a very bleak, hopeless horror movie that, to me, I think reflects the tone that life must be for many like Zoomers right now, in the era of COVID, the era of climate collapse, the era of like societal collapse, economic collapse that's going on throughout the world, and especially the West. Like, oh yeah, you have to wake up every morning, you just kind of feel this bleak dread.
I think it's the one thing, and I don't know if it's just because me needing clarification. So after they allow whatever it is in their body, it's supposed to be like, oh, it's an amazing experience, even though like they're scared. And I'm wondering, like, I almost wish that there had been like more, like, was it supposed to be like a body high? Was it because, like, to me, I'm like,
it was like psychedelics?
Like psychedelics, because like this weird thing is like they keep doing it over and over again. So it gets to the point that you're like, if it's scary, why would you do it? Because it's like, it's hard for me to pinpoint, because it's like, I've been on roller coasters. I find them fun, but it's also sort of like, when we see, for example, Mia go through it, it seems horrifying. And they also don't always have good experiences, because Daniel has a horrible experience when he tries it. And the one person who doesn't try it is Jade, which, because she doesn't try it, she's never telling them like, no, I think you guys are overacting. You guys,
she doesn't really know. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also like this strange thing of like, they don't mention really anything to the adults.
But that makes sense. That's a teenage thing.
Yeah.
Right?
And like, and it would make sense, because it's like, but I kind of almost wish that there had been an adult or two that knew about it and kept being like, you guys have obviously lost it.
Or like having some of them sit down and try to explain after what happens in that pivotal scene.
Yeah.
And then just cut to the adult's face, just kind of like ludicrously looking at them like, are you guys high? Do we need to get some drug tests? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But I think you're right. That may be the missing element, is the point of view of the possessed person.
Yeah.
During those 90 seconds of possession, because that would help the audience understand the euphoria that most of them seem to have after the fact.
Yeah, because like you're watching them and it looks like they're about to choke. Their eyes are black. Sometimes they're drooling, or sometimes they're doing things that they normally wouldn't do, that like you kind of find yourself horrified and embarrassed for them, but they keep doing it again and again and again.
Well, I think the implication is that death is a numbing of the senses.
Yeah.
And so when they get those 90 seconds to be inside those bodies, they become obsessed with like physical sensation, because it's something that they're deprived of in death.
Like in death, yeah. But I'm wondering what occurs to the person who is allowing themselves to be possessed.
Yeah, and I think the movie, I hope that wasn't like well, if it does well, we'll address that in a sequel, because I really would have liked to have had that addressed in this movie, because it would help me appreciate the horror of it.
I know it's an analog for like drugs, but I still want to know, to then be like, all right, I understand why you're willing to do it, despite the fact that there are awful consequences that could occur.
Because we have a scene where a possessed person makes out with a bulldog.
Yeah.
When that person wakes up, do they indicate they don't understand why they're doing what they're doing, right?
No, it seemed like he was.
Was he fully aware while it was happening?
Yeah, and he was
Okay.
fully aware and just like embarrassed and horrified.
But he had no control over his body.
Yeah. And
okay.
And however, he still uses the hand again.
So that like adds a whole bunch of other implications to certain things of characters who end up in bad shape, that they're still in there somewhere.
Yeah.
There was a really interesting moment in the movie where a spirit shows me a vision of hell.
Yeah.
And I think the movie saying by the end of it that was a lie. Did you get that same vibe that they were lied to about that's what it looks like?
Yeah.
Because death in the movie, when we eventually do see it, it feels like disconnected in space and time, and you're wandering and you're in familiar places, but the places are connected to each other in ways that are non-linear.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very disorienting. And so I liked that portrayal of death. That's, I would say, just as frightening as a sort of classical hell or something. Now we're comparing this, let's say, to Cobweb. Cobweb, I have no interest in what that director and writer are doing next. What about the Philippou brothers here?
I might be. There was some interesting visual stuff, especially when it came to them being under the influence of the spirits that they did. There are certain beats, there are certain elements. Like, for example, like I said, when the group of teenagers are together, you feel like this is a group of teenagers that like being around each other, that feel the chemistry feels natural. But when you pull them apart or put them as couples, that's when it kind of dwindles a little.
What I loved, and I feel like the best scene of the movie is when the horror explodes about the middle of the movie.
Yeah.
And if they can recreate that and sustain it for a longer period of time, I think they'd have something pretty good. I also feel like this film, when you really look at the plot of it, was not the most creative horror plot.
No.
It is a pretty standard by the numbers kind of horror story with some little flourishes here and there. And I would hope that in their next movie, because I always think of, when you think about A24 horror debuts, I think of Ari Aster and I think of Hereditary, which is a movie whose, I feel that the story didn't go where you expected it. It had the kind of characters you don't expect to see in a horror film. Yeah. It had a tone and a style that felt all its own. It was something I had not seen in a horror movie before. And that's what I was hoping I was going to find here, like a distinctive tone and voice. And I don't necessarily think we got that. I think they're capable of it from the highs, those points in the movie. But we have to wait, I guess, for a follow-up to see if they're able to do that. Yeah,
you have to do like a lot of more stronger writing, and that also dictates between like also having like knowledgeable actors that are going to take that writing and take it a step further, and being a confident director yourself, because you have to decide what stays, what goes, and that can take time.
Well, that's when we think of like horror debuts too, I also think of like Jordan Peele's Get Out, which I don't really like Get Out as much as everybody else seems to. Mm-hmm. I feel that Jordan Peele is a director who's gotten better with age. I wasn't very warm towards Us when it came out, but over time I've warmed up to it more and I appreciate it more. And like Nope, I think is my favorite Peele movie so far. Yeah. And so I'm hoping with these brothers, we kind of see a similar trajectory. Like first movie, good, but we build on that and we improve and we get better and we tighten that writing up. That was the Pop Cult Podcast for this week. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to check out our show notes for any relevant links to reviews, and especially to our website, popcult.blog, where you can find a lot more reviews over there. Make sure to subscribe wherever it is you listen to podcasts so you'll be notified when new episodes are out. And if you follow us over on popcult.blog, you'll find that this month we're doing a whole series, a flashback to 1983, looking at films that turned 40 years old this year, and seeing what was out there that we might have missed. We've also got a review for the first season of The Bear coming up next week that I'm looking forward to, as well as other reviews and some solo tabletop roleplay game actual plays as well. If you enjoy what we do here on the podcast and over on popcult.blog, we'd really encourage you to think about supporting us on Patreon. We've got lots of reward tiers for you to pick from. Speaking of our patrons, I want to thank Morphine, who donates at the sneak preview level, and Becca and Matt, who donate at the writer's room level. If you donate at the writer's room level or higher, you get to pick a movie every month for us to watch and review, and you can even include your own thoughts on that film with that review if you so please. Well, until next time, keep listening.